over your bike, not to a parking attendant, but to our system. It did really influence our business big time. The car ownership in cities will continue to decline, and we will see more other micro-mobility concepts taking place. My name is Zahn, and I am the founder of My Bike Valet. Originally, as you can hear with my accent, I'm from Germany, and I moved to the US in 2000. By trade, I'm a mechanical engineer, but always worked in IT and consulting. And consulting is what brought me to the US from Germany. So I did about 10 plus years of SAP consulting. And then around 2004, I set up my own consulting boutique in the US to serve mid-sized companies that moved away from SAP consulting. And then in about late 2017, I started with the first ideas around what today is My Bike Valet. In a nutshell, is peace of mind. Let us watch over your bike. So the phrase valet parking in the US means that when you go for dinner at a restaurant, pre-pandemic, of course, then you would hand over your car to a parking attendant, and that's called valet parking in the US. And we want to implement a similar concept around bicycles. So you hand over your bike, not to a parking attendant, but to our system, which stores it away safely. And when you come out, then you retrieve your bike. So the bike is brought to you safely again. It's still there. Nicely organized, well watched over. So it's really peace of mind. Let us watch over your bike. That's our mission. Been on a bicycle since the age of 4. So for me, a bike has always been the way to get around town, to run errands, to visit friends, and so on. And at some point, I also picked up road cycling as exercising option, and so did my wife after we met. She figured out that's the only way to cope with me. And so I have been cycling since quite some time, and the idea of the bike parking carousel was born here in Boston. Boston is a very dense city, and there are really no good options to safely park your bicycle other than the usual lean-on parker. So it's post or something where you can attach your bike to, but other than that, the bicycle is out in the elements, and people can steal stuff from your bike, which happened to me a couple of times. And so we came up with the most compact system on the market with plenty of features. So it's a little bit like the Swiss knife concept in bicycle parking. So we have the option, we have a bicycle parking carousel, and you can have a roof over it, and you can have a fence around it, and you can add e-bike charging, and that's how this idea came up. Cycling is a fast-growing market, especially in the pandemic. This has shown to be one of the fastest-growing industries. And so there are new features and services evolving in the bike parking industry as this demand grows. So there's, of course, a pretty big market share for the regular get-around town bikes, which usually means the simple lean-on parker where you can attach your bike to. But more and more people also get these expensive e-bikes, and they retail for easily $2,000 or euros or more. And these people who buy these bikes, they really want to park them safely, and often also ideally want to charge their batteries without removing the batteries and bringing them into the office or home. And so this is where the bike parking industry is evolving around. Also, zoning for new construction often requires a certain number of bicycle parking spots per apartment. So in Germany, for example, it's very common in cities that for a family apartment of 4, so parents, 2 kids, it is required to provide 4 bicycle parking spaces. And then in the bicycle parking industry, you have also the bike sharing concepts, and I could go on and on. So it's really a fast growing market and industry. I think you get the idea. Scooters are actually quite a different segment of the micromobility industry. So that's completely outside of our scope, and we don't compete with the scooters. So that's really for the last mile. But bike sharing is a little bit different. So we have some overlap there. And currently we are targeting residential bike parking. And once the pandemic is over, also company parking. And especially in the company parking field, I wouldn't say compete, but we have overlap with bike sharing. And we can include bike sharing into our concept also easily. Cities, of course, they have had growing populations ever since the city was invented thousands of years ago. And that means that you have a continuously increasing density in cities. And that is a very natural conflict with the role of cars in cities, because cars need space not only when they are parked, but when they move around and when they arrive at their destination. And so I'm convinced that the rate of car ownership in cities will continue to decline, as it already does, especially in the US, as long as other options can compete with cars in terms with the car ownership, in terms of comfort versus efficiency. So meaning when you look at Lyft and Uber, the ride-hailing platforms, they provide a comfortable way to get around town without having your own car. Yeah? And when you look at the bicycle, that is clearly in the efficiency, especially with e-bikes, also for some longer distances, in the efficiency segment, clearly competing with the car big time. And so I think that the car ownership in cities will continue to decline, and we will see more other micro-mobility concepts taking place. For me, yes, it's a very clear yes. For others, technology, it's not always a yes that this makes life more comfortable. There's also a challenge involved. But if you manage to make technology user-friendly enough, then I think you're in a good way to make lives more comfortable. A good example today is when you want to get from A to B. Let's say you arrive in New York at John F. Kennedy Airport and you want to go to Fairfield, Connecticut. And so what are the options? Yeah, and there you have disassociated services. So you have first an air train, and then you have a train or a bus, and you have different schedules. And if technology can bring these things together into one platform, as does Google Maps, for example, today. So you just type in, I want to go to Fairfield, Connecticut, and it takes your current location and it gives you the different options. Then your life can become much more comfortable with technology. And also in our case, so when you want to run an errand and you want to take your e-bike to ride 7 miles or 10 kilometers into the city and do something at the city hall, then if you can check before, hey, where can I park my bike safely, and maybe reserve a spot, then that is definitely an added comfort to your daily life, we believe. This was actually quite easy for me. That's quite easy for me to answer. Today, it's of course all about the apps. However, in our case, the most challenging thing was really to resolve the mechanical side, meaning especially the motorization of the carousel and to integrate that with the electronics. And all of that in a way so that the operation is smooth, is safe, long-lasting, and efficient. That has been actually the biggest challenge. And I don't want to go into the details for obvious reasons, but the IT side is not so much a challenge in our case. as a true startup, you're much better off working with a network of service providers, as you don't have the need for, let's say, a full-time engineer in the beginning, or a full-time programmer, or a team of programmers. So it's much easier to work with a network of service providers, but you might not always find the best competencies right away, which you need. So it's potentially not always a straight line either. So yes, it's better to work with service providers, but be prepared for some pitfalls. So before the pandemic, the idea was to start sales in the US and the North American market first, and then to move into the German and European market afterwards. And that's also why we split the development between Germany and the US. So Germany is where we develop the mechanical side, and the US, the electronics and the software through you guys, Redwerk. But the pandemic has clearly thrown a bunch of monkey wrenches our way in terms of logistics. Logistics handling has been a nightmare during the pandemic. So our geography is international, and logistics continues to be a nightmare, but we are seeing the end of that. It did really influence our business big time. So we intended, as I said, to target US cities first, corporate and residential parking. But then once the pandemic hit, this took a backseat first due to everybody working at home from remote and so on. So this clearly changed our demand picture. And European countries, on the other side, they have been much more active with green initiatives during the pandemic, in order to keep the economies going or to jumpstart economies again. So we decided to shift our focus to cities in Germany, and have been quite successful with that. And I expect that we can start sales in the US later this year. In a nutshell, sustainable, as is what we target as an industry. Sustainable, team-oriented, and win-win for all parties. That means if you like what you do, and if what you do makes the world a better place, then you, your customers, and your team are aligned, you're in a good place, and that automatically translates into a corporate culture. That's a really good question, and I had to go through the last 2.5 years to the most inspiring to move on is really the feedback from customers, from friends, and from potential customers also that we receive. And the best example for that is, and for that I had to go back to really find the best example. So just before the pandemic, last year in January 2020, we were invited by one of our partners to present our prototype of the motorized version, the Solitary, at a trade show in Germany. And this was truly inspiring because the trade show was called perimeter protection. So to protect your property, your residential property, up to a nuclear power plant. So it was all about perimeters. And so we went there in a guerrilla marketing style. So we were not announced that we would present that there was a bicycle parking system there at the trade show. And people just walked by, saw something interesting, saw bicycles sticking out or somebody trying to park a bicycle there. And our booth was packed during the 3 days from 15 minutes after opening to basically the end of the show, really a couple of minutes before they closed down. And we let everybody try to use our system. We explained it, and honestly, everybody left with a smile on their faces. And that has been the most inspiring for us. That keeps us moving forward and leaving us convinced that we are on a good way.